I stood just inside the foyer of Maison K, clutching the small blue box wrapped in silver twine. It wasn't elaborate, just clean lines and one of those paper bows you tie yourself. The kind you learn to make when you've wrapped gifts with grocery bags and string. My hands felt cold despite the heating vents whispering warmth from the floor. Through the glass divider, I saw them all. Tallis in a tailored gray blazer. Neely with her perfectly calibrated laugh and a dozen other parents clinking champagne flutes like it was the Met Gala and not an 8-year-old's birthday. Ezra sat at the center of it all, smiling politely, while someone helped him cut into a cake topped with miniature gold-dusted soccer cleats. The host, a young woman with a clipboard and a perfectly neutral face, looked at me, then looked past me. "Do you have a reservation, ma'am?" "No," I said, adjusting the gift in my hands. "I'm here for my grandson's birthday. Ezra Lorne." She hesitated, flipping pages. "I'm not sure I see you on the list." Before I could reply, Tallis stepped into view. His voice carried farther than he probably intended, or maybe exactly as far. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I offered a small smile. "Just stopping by. I brought Ezra something. This place is..." He gave me a once-over eyes, pausing on my coat, then my shoes. "It's expensive." Neely appeared beside him, looping her arm through his. "We didn't think you'd want to come. It's a little formal." Tallis added, chuckling. "We didn't think you could cover your own meal." The host blinked, unsure what to do next. She stepped aside slightly. "If you'd like, ma'am, I can ask someone to check if there's space." "No," I said, quietly, stepping back. "I understand." The box wobbled slightly in my hands. I caught it before it could fall. Ezra's name was still written neatly on the card. I stepped outside, wind curling around my ankles, as I moved to the window. I wanted one more look at him before I left. When Tallis was 5, he loved peanut butter sandwiches, with honey drizzled in the middle. I'd cut them diagonally and wrap them in wax paper, slipping them into a paper bag with a single apple slice and a note that said, "Be brave." I skipped breakfast most days and sometimes lunch just to stretch what we had. There were nights I boiled pasta in silence and scraped butter from the foil with a spoon. The lights flickered often, but I told him it was part of a game, the Power Outage Parade. He used to come home with stories about how he'd shared his sandwich with a classmate who forgot theirs. He'd beam proud of himself. I'd nod, hiding the ache in my stomach and the guilt that I couldn't pack too. By the time he turned 10, Tallis had started asking why we didn't have a real car, or why the other kids' parents had normal jobs. I told him cleaning houses and bussing tables was normal because it kept our lights on and the rent paid. But shame blooms in kids before they have the words to name it. I saw it in his face when he asked me not to walk him to class anymore. At 19, he got a scholarship and never looked back. He visited less. His thank you calls turned into transactional updates. When he landed a corporate job, he started sending me self-help books for Christmas. I never asked him for anything, not then, not after. It wasn't until I turned 47 and inherited a modest pension from my father that I allowed myself to dream beyond survival. I bought a failing cafe downtown, the kind with wobbly stools and a griddle that hissed at the wrong temperature. I stayed late. I mopped floors. I sat with chefs after hours and listened more than I spoke. I taught myself profit margins, vendor negotiation, how to read people and read contracts. The first year, we barely broke even. The second, we were full every Friday. By the 5th, we'd expanded. Quietly. No announcements. Just forward motion. I never told Tallis. He never asked. But sometimes I wonder if I was shielding him or myself. I stood just outside the main window, pretending to read the specials board beside the host stand. Inside, Ezra was blowing out candles. Neely's mother had her phone up filming like it was a red carpet moment. There were linen napkins, silver-tiered platters, and a man in a white coat shucking oysters with a flourish. Laughter bloomed like steam from their table. Everyone looked polished, expensive, sure of their place. A woman in heels brushed past me on the sidewalk, then paused. "Hi, are you my driver?" she asked, squinting at her phone. I shook my head quietly. "No, just waiting." She muttered an apology and walked off. I stepped back from the glass just enough to be out of view. My coat suddenly felt older than it was. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone more out of habit than anything else. One new notification. I opened the spreadsheet Zadie had sent that morning, K Holdings Q1 Performance. The numbers stared back at me, revenue strong across all properties, operating margins higher than expected. Maison K outperforming every location on the eastern seaboard. I scrolled to the bottom. 7 restaurants, 2 commercial buildings, 1 hospitality group. My name attached to every single one of them. Tallis didn't know. Not because I'd hidden it poorly, but because he'd never thought to ask. Never thought there was anything worth discovering in my world of diner food and kitchen talk. When he pictured success, he saw boardrooms and spreadsheets, never heat lamps and cutlery orders. He hadn't seen the woman who spent nights in walk-in freezers reorganizing produce deliveries to save on waste, or the one who negotiated real estate terms with men who underestimated her on purpose. He only saw a coat, a box of mother who'd stayed too quiet too long. But silence becomes shape over time. And if you let them narrate your life too long, eventually, even you start to believe their version. The clipboard girl reappeared at the door, ushering in a new couple. I glanced back inside the glass just in time to see Ezra lift a shrimp the size of his palm. He looked happy, and I had no intention of letting that smile disappear. The first time Tallis asked me not to come to school was Parent Career Day. He was in 5th grade and had just gotten a new pair of sneakers with bright blue laces. I'd planned to bring in cookies for the class and talk about what it was like managing a cafe kitchen. He called me the night before, voice tense. "Maybe it's better if you skip this one, Mom." Mrs. Tanaka's dad is a dentist, and Jordan's mom works for NASA. I remember staring at the cooling racks of snickerdoodles, the smell of cinnamon clinging to my sleeves. I said I understood, that it was fine. I even laughed, told him I had inventory to do anyway. That was the start of the slow fade. Fewer calls, shorter texts, a birthday missed with the excuse of a weekend retreat. I told myself he was busy, newly married, new child. I told myself I wasn't owed his time just because I'd given him mine. But over the years, my presence became an obligation he managed rather than a connection he maintained. I stopped offering updates. When he did call, he never asked about my work. He assumed I still ran a single corner cafe. Once he jokingly referred to me as the omelet queen. I laughed with him. I always laughed with him, even when it scraped something raw. He doesn't know that M. Lorne Holdings signs the lease on the building where his own consulting firm shares space. Doesn't know that the wine bar he praised during a holiday party was mine, or that the elegant bistro in Boston, where he once proposed a business lunch, was a concept I built from nothing. My board knows me. My general managers trust me. Even our new investors have flown in for quarterly reviews, shaking my hand with respect. But my son thinks I wear an apron and refill coffee cups, and maybe if I'm lucky, balance a till at the end of the night. And I let him. I let him reduce me, so I wouldn't have to watch him struggle with the truth. But there's only so long you can live in someone else's version of you. The candles flickered in a perfect row, 8 tiny flames, dancing atop a fondant soccer ball flanked by sugar cleats and edible grass. Ezra clapped his hands, delighted. A waiter in a crisp vest placed the cake down as the crowd leaned in, cooing and filming and making a show of it all. I stood just outside the glass, watching him smile. That smile was the only reason I hadn't already walked away. Neely leaned toward Tallis and said something I couldn't hear. He smirked. Then she raised her voice just enough to carry. Glad we didn't let her bring that home-baked thing, she laughed. Can you imagine plastic wrap and raisins? Laughter followed light and careless. It brushed past me like a cold draft. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, grateful for the distraction. Zadie, chef says the seasonal menu is perfect. We ready to launch? I stared at the message. That launch had taken months. New dishes, redesigned plates, a full media campaign scheduled for tomorrow. I'd personally flown in to approve the plating. But my thumb hovered. I typed 2 words. Pause launch. Then I slipped the phone back into my coat, lifted the silver gift box from the bench beside me, and turned. I didn't walk fast. I didn't need to. My heels clicked softly against the flagstone as I circled the building, past the valet, past the loading dock, toward the staff entrance I'd used so many times in the early days. A young dishwasher opened the door with his shoulder, balancing a bin of glassware. He glanced up at me and blinked. Ma'am? I nodded. Evening. He stepped aside without question. I walked past racks of clean cutlery and the scent of citrus disinfectant. The heartbeat of the restaurant lived back here. And in this space, away from the curated performances and carefully posed photographs, I remembered who I was. I remembered what I'd built. Declan would be in the office. Chef Hira would already know I was here. There was only one thing left to do. Declan looked up from a clipboard as I stepped into the corridor. His brow lifted for just a beat before he straightened, already slipping the pen into his pocket. Madam Chair, he said, his voice warm but professional. We didn't expect you today. Shall I clear your table? Not yet, I said, setting my purse on the staff shelf behind him. Don't alert anyone. I'd like to observe for a moment. He nodded without question, the kind of trust that comes from years of quiet leadership. Declan had been with me since we opened the 3rd location. He'd seen me scrub Grout Carry Produce Fire, 2 executive chefs, and console 1 dishwasher when her father passed away. We'd built this place with tired feet and clean hands. I made my way into the kitchen where the scent of rosemary and charred lemon filled the air. Chef Hira turned from the sauté station the moment she sensed movement. She didn't smile right away. She simply came forward and wrapped her arms around me. You're early, she whispered. I'm not staying long. She nodded, stepped back, and gestured toward the sous chef. He nailed the lamb tonight. You'd be proud. I already am. Someone offered me a glass of water. Someone else passed me a tasting spoon, which I waved off. I didn't need to taste anything. This kitchen ran like a heart that beat in rhythm with mine. I found the small hallway window that peeked into the main dining room. From here, I could see the corner table where Tallis sat, one hand wrapped around a wine glass, his other resting on the back of Neely's chair. Ezra was laughing, reaching for a breadstick. The light from the chandelier caught the edge of the gift box I'd left outside. No one had noticed it missing. I watched Tallis tilt his head back and sip, comfortable and composed. It was a bottle we'd added to the reserve list last fall. A Syrah from Mendocino, sourced through a vineyard I co-owned with an old friend from Napa. My name was on every invoice in this building, every lease, every title, every whispered story the staff passed down about how the owner once cleaned tables beside them. Declan stepped into the dining room with the calm ease of someone who knew exactly what kind of silence he was about to break. He approached the table where Tallis sat. Mid-sentence, a fork-raised laughter still fresh on his face. Declan's tone was courteous even. "Excuse me, Mr. Lorne," he said. "Just confirming your mother is joining you." "Yes." Tallis's hand froze. The fork hovered mid-air. What Declan turned his head slightly and gestured behind him. I stepped forward, coat draped over one arm, the tailored black dress underneath, catching just enough light to say I didn't come unprepared. I didn't come to be dismissed. "I was told this party was for family," I said. The laughter stopped. The utensils stilled. All that filled the air now was the low hum of background jazz and the click of Ezra's fork against his plate. Declan added his voice steady. "Chef, also needs your approval on the wine list redesign, ma'am. She said the new Rhone varietal arrived this morning." Neely's face turned from pink to pale in seconds. Ezra's eyes widened. "Grandma owns this place." Tallis looked between Declan and me, mouth opening, then closing. His cheeks flushed, and his fingers tightened around the stem of his glass. I could see the calculations beginning behind his eyes, how far this had gone without his knowing how many assumptions he'd made without asking. I walked to the side of the table and set my clutch down beside Ezra's juice. He looked at me like I'd just stepped out of a fairy tale. I offered him a soft smile, then glanced toward the cake crumbs scattered near his plate. "I didn't bring dessert," I said lightly. "Thought I'd let the kitchen handle it tonight." No one spoke. Neely was still frozen, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. Across from me, Tallis blinked twice, as if trying to blink the narrative back into place. But the story had shifted. The center had moved, and no one at that table knew where to stand anymore. Tallis swallowed hard, the disbelief still clinging to his voice. You manage this place." I folded my hands in my lap. "Own," I said gently. "Fully. Along with the building your office rents, including the square footage you mortgaged last year for that startup." A hush fell over the table. Somewhere behind us, silverware clinked softly, the world continuing its polite rituals, unaware or unwilling to absorb the shift in air. Neely forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, that's impressive. We're just so glad you could join us." "Really?" But the guests at the next table had already turned their heads. One man whispered something into his wife's ear. Another looked down at his phone, then up at me, suddenly interested. That's how status works, dismissed until it's undeniable. I leaned forward slightly and placed the small, silver-wrapped box in front of Ezra. "Here," I said. "I remembered you liked drawing last summer, sketching pencils, real ones." He tore through the ribbon with both hands, eyes lighting up at the soft leather roll of graphite and charcoal inside. "These are like the ones from that museum," I smiled. "They're better." He stood up on the bench and threw his arms around me, careless and full-hearted, the way only children can be. "That's all I needed," I whispered into his hair. When I pulled back, Tallis was watching us. The color had drained from his face. Not just embarrassment. It was something else, recognition maybe, a realization settling in like dust. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left for him to say. I turned toward the staff corridor as Declan approached from the side, nodding once in silent respect. "Would you like us to prepare your usual table upstairs?" he asked. "No," I said, quietly rising to my feet. "I'll take the elevator. Alone." I ate alone in the upstairs lounge tucked behind a curved glass wall that overlooked the city. The staff brought out the halibut Chef Hira's seasonal special and a small salad dressed exactly the way I like it. No one hovered. No one fussed. Just a quiet stream of respect in the form of warm plates and water glasses, never empty. When I stood to leave, Declan met me by the elevator and walked me to the lobby himself. A few servers nodded as I passed. One slipped me a folded napkin with a handwritten thank you tucked inside. Tallis was waiting near the front entrance, hands in his pockets, eyes darting like he wasn't sure whether to speak or disappear. When I reached him, he fell into step beside me. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, his voice low. I stopped just before the door. "Because I wanted you to value the woman who raised you," I said, looking straight at him. "Not the one who paid for your dessert." He winced barely. "It's not that I didn't care. It's that you assumed I interrupted. Assumed I'd stay small so you could feel large. Assumed I had nothing to say that couldn't be corrected. Assumed I'd always be there." Quiet. He didn't answer. "If you want a relationship with me," I said, "it won't be on borrowed pride. I don't need your guilt or your performance. I need your presence and your honesty." He nodded once, and it was the first real movement I'd seen from him all evening. Just then, the door swung open, and Ezra bounded out with a paper crown half slipping off his head. "Grandma." He ran into my arms again, tighter this time. I held him, the weight of him grounding something deep in me I hadn't realized was still floating. Neely lingered just inside, silent. I didn't look at her. Ezra squeezed once more, then let go. "I'll draw you something," he whispered. "From the new pencils." I smiled. "Make it big." Ezra's legs swung beneath the linen-draped chair, his sketchpad resting against the edge of the table. He hummed softly, while his pencil moved, tongue poking from the corner of his mouth as he focused. Chef Hira moved gracefully around the private kitchen, plating handmade pasta with roasted garlic and sweet basil, the way Ezra liked it. No servers, no fanfare, just us. 1 week had passed since the birthday party. Tallis hadn't called. Neely sent a clipped thank you text that said nothing and meant even less. I didn't respond. I wasn't angry, just done explaining. Ezra looked up from his drawing. "Grandma, will you teach me how to cook?" I set my fork down and leaned closer. "Only if you help me name our next restaurant." He grinned, flipping to a new page. "It should have dragons. And noodles. And pillows on the floor." "Then that's what we'll build," I said. Later that night, after the dishes were cleared, and Ezra had been picked up by his father with a stiff nod and no eye contact, I sat at my desk and opened the folder labeled Future. Inside were copies of every property, title, business share, and account. I updated the file with new notes, clear terms about how these holdings would be passed on, not just to Ezra, to those who showed up with more than expectations. Conditions: respect, participation, acknowledgement. No one would inherit by accident. No one would inherit by entitlement. I clicked save and closed the laptop. The room went still again. Outside, the sign over Maison K glowed in warm amber against the dark, and below it, etched into the base plate in soft metal, were 5 small words that hadn't always been there. Established by M. Lorne. For years I'd built quietly, out of sight, out of thanks. I'd let my own story shrink so others could feel taller. But the table had always been mine. They just hadn't noticed until they needed a seat.